Jambo Rafiki, I'm Elizabeth from Kasiwa82 and I hope you're doing really well. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. It's Tuesday, so we're going to be talking about all things books, and the playlist to the TBR Tuesday is always linked up above as well as down below for you. So what I'm going to be doing today is talking about the Invisible Cities project wrap-up for the month of March. Now before I launch into that though, I do want to share some exciting news. Displacement by Kiku Hughes. I don't know if you've read this comic, but if you haven't, I would recommend picking it up and joining me when I talk to the author about her work. So it is part of the Newburyport Literary Festival, and it will be taking place on Sunday, April 25th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So I will leave links for all of that information down below for you. Hope to see you there. So let's launch into the Invisible Cities project. As always, I will have links for the project folks down below, so you can go take a look at that. And essentially what we're doing is there are 3 countries picked each month, and the goal is to read something in translation from each one of those countries. So far this year, I've done really well. This month, was a little bit more tricky because there was a lot of other things going on. Life gets in the way sometimes of good books. So the countries for this month, or the month of March, were Mexico, Iraq, and Libya. Now, one of the things that I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier Invisible Cities project, there's something about translated works that tend to be really tough material. And you know, sometimes you're in the mood for that and sometimes you're not. So let's go ahead and talk about the books in the order I read them. So I started with Mexico, and for this I read The Story of My Teeth by Valeria Luiselli. Now I will leave the links to, or the list of the books and authors and translators and all that good stuff down below, so you can take a look at this. I listened to this particular audiobook, and it was narrated by Armando Duran and Thom Rivera. And the book itself is relatively short. It was a 4 hours and 7 minutes length on the audiobook. Now, people have had really mixed reviews on this book. It's my first time reading the author, so I figure this is as good a time as any to launch into her work. And I was really pleasantly surprised. Now, a couple of things to know going in. The strength to me of this book has to do with the voice. So this is translated from the Spanish, right? So I would recommend trying this. If you go through and read or listen to the first hour or so, and if the voice doesn't grab you, then it probably is not for you. The voice is what I found so powerful in this particular book. So the title, you know, you're sitting there going, okay, so what's going on? This is the story of Highway Sanchez. Now, you know, I know there's an old adage that we are all the heroes of our own lives, and Highway Sanchez is no exception. He is a consummate storyteller, he's a connoisseur of stories, and he's a world-renowned, world-class auctioneer. You know, those people that run auctions, right? So what is really fun about this book is the story is very much told through Highway's point of view. And he does this, the structure of the book is really interesting in that when he tells you a story, you know, he tells a story and then at the end of that he goes, end of story. Or he'll remember something and he'll be telling us about that memory. And when he comes to the end of that, he says, end of memory. So it almost feels very much like an oral storytelling device that the author uses here. And I don't want to say a lot because, again, I think part of what is really fun about this book is the reveal of what happens with this particular character and the stories that he's telling us. And there was the humor was unexpected, and I found myself smiling almost throughout this book. Now, there's a section that has to do with clowns. The things got a little dark, and I was like, oh no, another dark book. But, you know, we pretty quickly get out of that particular segment of the book. The voice is great. The writing is really, really good. The humor was unexpected and delightful. I was rooting for Highway all the way through. They are people, I looked at a couple of reviews of this book who called it pretentious. And I guess it is to a certain extent because Highway is a really well-read erudite person. And so, he's familiar with Woolf and Virginia, that is, and, philosophers from around the world. And those kinds of things get sprinkled in throughout. You either like that or you don't. I just thought it was so well done. Now, the thing I will say is, when I got to the end of the book, I learned that a couple of things. One, that the final chapter of this book did not exist in the Spanish translation. That Christina MacSweeney, who does the translation, actually wrote the final chapter and kind of ties things up in a bow, if you will. In the afterword, we learned that the author wrote this book kind of one section at a time and was working with the factory workers in a juice factory in Mexico, who would then read aloud that particular section, discuss it, and then she would incorporate a lot of what they'd said or how they react to that book as she wrote the next section. So there's some interesting things about how the story is constructed outside the narrative, and people have talked about that it very much felt like it was a produced story. However, I was delighted throughout. I was taken in by Highway's storytelling abilities, his way to spin a yarn, and yes, there's the story of his teeth, and I think part of what makes this so fun is actually going along for the ride. Now, the other thing I will say is I think I read this or listened to this in 2 sittings at 4 hours and 7 minutes or so. It doesn't take very long. The other thing I would say is to read this in as few sittings as possible, because I think once you get wrapped up in the story, if you come out of it, it can be hard to get back in. So I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. 4 stars. I will definitely be looking up Valeria Luiselli's other works. I was just so impressed, and she's a relatively young author as well. So really excited about this one, and highly recommend this on audio, by the way. Highly recommend this on audio. It is really, really fun. Next up for Iraq, not so fun. I picked up The Corpse Exhibition and Other Stories by Hassan Blasim. I hope I'm pronouncing these names right. And it's translated from the Arabic by Jonathan Wright. Again, all of that information is linked down below for you. Now, the thing about this particular collection, it's a collection of short stories, and it is told, it's the Iraq War told from the point of the Iraqi. So those of us from the outside, especially from the West, and I'm in the US, we have a very certain perspective on the Iraq War. And this collection of stories, there are 14 stories, I believe. There is no humor here. There is nothing light. It is dark, as you would expect from a war-torn country. There are very explicit things that are difficult to read on the page. So just be warned going that in. The title should be kind of the trigger warning, okay? Now, what I will say is the author, and again, this is the first time I've read anything by him. I know he is a filmmaker, and he then had to leave Iraq because, the government was having issues with what he was doing, and he's writing these stories from Finland. The stories are incredibly well crafted. I mean, some worked way better for me than others, as with any collection, but of the 14 stories, 6 of them I give 4 stars to. That's how good these are. They even though they take a little while to read, because you're almost cringing. No matter where the story starts, you start cringing because you know the author's going to take you someplace pretty dark, and he does. I mean, horrible things happen to the people both on the page and off the page, and we just move right along. So kind of getting a sense of what it is like to live in this particular in these particular stories. These people feel very real. They feel very fleshed out. They are complicated characters, and horrible things happen to them, a lot of which they have very little control over. And so what happens? How does that change you as a people, as a society, when you're living under, that kind of regime, and then through these many years of war? It is very difficult to read. I will say that, okay? Now, again, like I said, some of incredibly great stories in here. There's a theme of magical realism kind of running throughout every story. In some cases, it's much stronger. In other cases, it's kind of more background magical realism, if you will. It's so well written. I would absolutely recommend this for anyone who's interested in the content, right? So like I said, all the trigger warnings. Horrible things happen to men, horrible things happen to women and children. There is no easy story here. However, some of these stories have absolutely stayed with me. Now, on my Goodreads account, and I will link that down for you below, I have rated each one of these stories individually, okay? Like I said, there were 6 4-stars, quite a few 3-stars, and a couple 2-stars that just quite didn't work for me. But overall, a really strong collection, a very violent, very bloody, very gruesome. Some people have said, hey, they felt like they were bludgeoned over the head, and I, to a certain extent, I see where they were coming from, but I also don't necessarily think it was gratuitously done, right? So just be aware of that going in. So I ended up giving this collection 3.5 stars. Really, it was difficult to read, but the stories have really stayed with me, and I enjoyed is not the right word, but I think I have an appreciation that I didn't have about that war from the inside looking out point of view, if you will. The third country for March was Libya. And after I read the Corpse Exhibition collection, I decided I cannot read anything more that's difficult. So I bailed on Libya. So I only did 2 countries this month, for the month of March, because the book I was going to read was by Hisham Matar, and I know, again, it's difficult and hard content, and I just did not want to do that going in. I decided, okay, I've done enough hard things this month in terms of reading material. I'm going to take a break. And that's, I think, one of the nice things is give yourself a break when you need them. You know better than anybody else what you can and cannot deal with, and especially when you're dealing with literature that's translated, some of that can be really tough reading, right? I'm looking for these happy stories. Where are they? So that's what I have for you for this month, or for March. I have already read the first book for the April countries that are picked. And Equatorial Guinea is the one I have already read. The next other 2 countries are Vietnam and Peru for the month of April. I have my books selected. They're with me, and I will get to those by the end of the month. I hope you're doing really well. If you've read any of these, I would love to talk to you about them in the comments down below. I look forward to seeing you at the Zoom call, which is free, by the way, at the Newburyport Literary Festival, to talk to Kiku Hughes about that book, Displacement. And if you are also reading along with the Invisible Cities Project, leave links for me for your reviews. I would love to go and see what you've been reading and what you thought about those books. Until I talk to you next time, happy reading. Bye.